I'm maybe going to start backwards because it's fresher to me and I can pick the books off of the pile. I decided to sink back into my Eberron series. As you can see, like the gap right here that's opening up, that's because I kept looking at that and going, I really loved Eberron. I loved like past tense, but I still love Eberron because I started looking at the gaming books again and remembering how much I really enjoyed running a game in Eberron. I think I ran a game for about a year and a half, 2 years. The last book I read today, or just read, I turn on the camera and I'm like, I got to get these books off the table. So Last War, it's an anthology that takes place not really after the Last War. I kind of went into this thinking it might be more, I don't know, fantasy, military fiction set in Eberron as part of the Last War, because it does say the tales of the Last War. They're not really tales from the Last War. Anyways, I don't want to get too deep into what Eberron is, because for people who don't know anything about Eberron, but Eberron is a setting in the Dungeons and Dragons world. It got kicked off in the early 2000s by Keith Baker as part of a competition, and it became a brand new setting during the kickoff of Dungeons and Dragons 3.0, version 3. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. There was maybe 1 or 2 that were in that 4.5 to 5-star range. Like in particular, again, there's no point in getting into details for people who don't know anything about Eberron, but there's like the Warforged. The Warforged are these basic automatons, golems that were given life, spark of life. The story about the automatons was fun. Again, this is all ambiguous because it means nothing to people who haven't read the book, right? But and then there was some, it was kind of a military fiction, but in the fantasy setting of Eberron. But Eberron's not really fantasy. It's sort of like a pulp noir adventure fantasy punk, if that makes sense. It's hard to explain the setting. It's really enjoyable though, but you kind of have to love the setting, is what I'm saying. Like 4 out of 5 stars is because I love the setting, so there's a bias there. But for someone coming at this and they know nothing about Eberron, I'm not sure if this is the best way into Eberron. It gives you some ideas of Eberron, but it's very non-fantasy Eberron, if that it is fantasy, because some of the races they'll mention, like the halflings or the dwarves or the warforged, and there's a little bit of that Dungeons and Dragons stuff going on, but it's like 10-15%. It's not a lot. There's a story with a vampire, which is kind of like a Dracula story, but an Eberron, and it doesn't really finish, and a couple of stories feel that way. There's maybe, I think there's 9 stories or something like that, where they're cool stories. They're written neat, but then they don't really have a resolution. They're kind of open-ended. I'm like, was this a prologue for a novel series that's coming out that I haven't read yet, because I haven't caught up to all the Eberron books? Some of them felt like they were just these side things that were going on, but they didn't fulfill. And so it was even hard for me to give it a 4 out of 5 star, but I enjoyed returning to Eberron, and I might take a break from Eberron because I ended up reading the Draconic Prophecies trilogy by James Wyatt as well, and I read this over Friday and Saturday. I mean, I was really grinding Eberron. The first book, Storm Dragon, I thought was interesting. It really goes into this idea of the Draconic Prophecies as it's kind of like this foundational aspect of Eberron, in the sense that these prophecies exist. No one really knows what these prophecies mean, and it's supposed to be intentionally ambiguous. It's supposed to be this thing you kind of add to your adventures, and it's something that drives things forward, and it's like it's maybe a MacGuffin. It's sort of a setting MacGuffin, but this series really leans into that, like really leans. Clearly it's for 3 trilogies, and these were like heftier books than normal, is what I would say. They're almost at the 400 page range, which is okay. It's not that much more, but it's about 100 pages more, 80 pages more than normal, and the font is really small. So I mean, it was significantly, I felt like I was grinding through this, and it was taking me longer than I normally take reading these kinds of books. This is kind of like fast food literature for me. Like, I can really rip through these, especially if I know the setting, and I'm kind of in the vibe, which is why I read the trilogy back to back. But what was I going to say? The first book is cool because it sticks to this idea of the Storm Dragon and what the Storm Dragon is, and kind of how that evolves, and it's neat how you can kind of predict it. It is a little bit predictable. This was like a 3 out of 5 star. Let me just get through this a lot quicker. This was like a 3 out of 5 star for me until I finished the trilogy, and then it started feeling like a 3.5. Maybe I like the characters more, and I'll talk about that when I get to book 2 and 3, where it felt like maybe it was a 3.54, and so I just gave the entire trilogy a 4 out of 5. Would it be a recommend for people who, again, aren't familiar with Eberron? I'm not sure. I think there's a bias going into this one as well. James Wyatt's writing was good. It was good. He's like a well-known name in the gaming space, right? I believe he's a designer for a lot of the books out there. Not a lot, but like I've seen his name a lot over the last 20, even 30 years, about 25 years at least. And so it was enjoyable. It was a little bit predictable, but it was enjoyable. What I would say, though, is it gets into the second book, and when I get to the Dragon Forge, things start to go a little bit weird for me, because I was reading this going, where is the main character? Like, and maybe it's like I had to kind of talk myself out of expecting that there should be this main character should have been more relevant here, but he really wasn't. And then I started to put myself in the mind space of like, where like those like heftier, like multi-book kind of arcs inside game worlds, where it turns into more of like a bunch of other stuff that's going on, and it's not really about the one character. The issue with that, though, is that this book is very much about that main character, and everything revolves around that main character. And so when I'm in the same trilogy and that character starts getting less of a presence than the side characters, who were actually the villains sort of in the first book, I don't want to spoil anything just in case you jump into this. I mean, it was a fun series. The point is that it gets to a point where I'm going, I don't know who I'm following anymore. And so this started to feel like a 3 out of 5 for me, because I'm like, there are really cool ideas around a changeling character and around a Warforged character, and I thought they were neat. But I'm like, but why am I following those two characters when I really want to know what's going on with this character and the love interest, which was a marriage thing? But it's like there was another love interest here that sort of disappeared, and it was just kind of weird. It felt like a gap for a book that was this dense, as in like small text and long. I'm just gonna move on, because the third book then is sort of maybe starts to feel like it's going to swing back around to the main character, but it doesn't. It's like two different perspectives. And one of them is you're following a bunch of characters that are in the city of Fairhaven, which is it's just the city, by the way. This is like, it's going to make people's hearts explode. For like, look, the first couple pages, there's like a printing error, and you can't really turn to pages because it's just sort of forced the way that the pages had to get smushed together. Does that give anyone, like, does anyone else's heart hurt right now? Yeah, I struggled. Let's just move on. There's like two parallel narratives going on here. There's the one that is the Dragon War. There's not really any dragons. There are, because, literally the character is called a Dragon Slayer because she kills a lot of dragons. But there's like this war going on. But who's not part of that war? The character that is sort of attached to the Storm Dragon, the idea of Storm Dragon, it's nowhere attached to this. He is sort of attached to the Dragon Forge, but in the sense of like, he kind of gets taken apart. I don't want to spoil it, right? But let's just say like he doesn't become what he is destined to be, but he is, because being taken apart is part of the prophecy of who he's dead. Listen, just roll with it. And so the Draconic War, I was like, oh, it's going to be a massive dragon fight or something like that. No, the entire perspective of that main character through the third book is sort of city stuff. It's city stuff, and it's the cool parts about the antagonists. Two of the antagonists here, again, if I say it, it'll spoil it. But I guess I've already said it. There's two characters in here. There's a changeling character, which is, there's like a growth arc there, and there's a Warforged character that there's a growth arc, and that growth arc goes through all 3 books, and they're really cool stories. They're like the story for me. You might as well have called this something completely different, and I would have followed the track of both of those characters on their own, and that would have been a novel for me, and I would have been happy. Now, all of it put together inside the Draconic Prophecies didn't really make any sense, because by the time the Dragon War got to maybe the last 10%, 15% of the book, it ripped. Like, I'm like, how are all these pieces coming together? There's literally a war going on where there's dragons and tieflings, and there's other things like the madness thing happening, and there's these threats, and that threat is going to come to the city if it doesn't get stopped. And I'm like, but it stops in like 10 or 15 pages. Like this could have been, and like I'm following like this side character, again, that love interest character, moving that plot along, and I didn't care. I didn't care because it had nothing to do with the Storm Dragon. The Storm Dragon prophecy ends up playing a part in the last, 15 pages, 20 pages, but it didn't land right. But I still gave it a 4 out of 5 stars because I really enjoyed the stories arcs of those two side characters. I didn't feel like they were the story of the Draconic War. They weren't really part of a prophecy. They just had cool character arcs, That was a really weird way. Anyway, so what I'm saying is, I don't know why I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, outside of like, I thought the writing was fun to follow, but it made me think a lot about the kind of prose that I get out of these kinds of novels. after kind of getting into a bunch of other modern fiction writing and just the sensibilities that the target audience of this kind of writing is. Like I started thinking about what purple prose was. Like this, like I took English in university 25 years ago, and I didn't, if purple prose was ever mentioned, I never remembered the term. I ended up having to look it up because of BookTube. I kept hearing it enough going, what the hell is this purple prose? And I was like, okay, once you understand what it is, okay, I get it now. While reading this, I was thinking about, this is sort of like fast food purple prose. If that makes sense. It's like, it's purple prose where I go, after reading a Brandon Sanderson, which I finished a Brandon Sanderson like last month, and it kind of changes the way, it changed the way I read. And like, I've been reading a lot of online fiction, web fiction, and there's a pace to it that just isn't this. It just isn't the gaming books. The gaming books do what I would say is like, it's like purple prose that isn't really classical purple prose. It's fast food purple prose. Like there's certain parts where description gets injected into the story, and I love world building, and so I do love those descriptors. But after getting used to a different way of writing, the pacing behind like character driven pacing, and there's just something different that I got out of Abercrombie and then I got out of Sanderson recently, and it just changed the way that I read, and I kind of consume the information, whereas those things felt like speed bumps to me, and they felt like drag. And I was like, maybe it's because I know the world well enough. I don't need it explained to me. And so I would hit these parts and I'm like, I don't really care. Like there's other stuff I really want you to get to, which is what the hell is the Storm Dragon's place in this story? And I'm getting a bunch of other stuff that I don't really care. Like you didn't make me care about any of these other environments and civilizations and people. And I don't care. And that's not it's a weird way of saying it, because I liked it, but I didn't care in terms of like its context to the story. Does that am I making any sense? As I'm going to go on to the next two books, because it sort of extends into these two books right here, which is the Lanternlight files written by Parker DeWolf. Now these I would explain as like, they're kind of the most grime punk, like the noir version of Eberron to the max. It's like you remove the fantasy stuff is definitely still in there, but these are effectively noir, pulp noir tales. And I kind of enjoy them for that, but at the same time, it was a little bit too noir. Like I've been buying all of the Ian Rankin books, for the Rebus series and stuff like that. I've been collecting them out of the, like every time I go to a thrift shop, I'm trying to collect that series. It's like 40 books long. It's like crime fic that I didn't really enjoy, but they're like 3 stars for me. Sometimes they'll creep into a 4, but I like getting through them. It's sort of a weird feeling. It's like, cause I can enjoy a 3, So these were probably 2.5 that I bumped up to 3 just because the characters were neat. But I consume pulp noir. Like I'll consume more of that, like that old time literature, because I'm just getting through the story, and the story is fun to experience, but I don't really connect with the characters. Kind of same thing with like the Rebus stories from Ian Rankin, right? I'm reading them, the crime mystery thing is happening, and I'm they're kind of pulling me around, and I'm kind of navigating all of that. But I started caring about Rebus more because, well, I'm 9 or 10 books in. There's a bit of a serialization that goes on from novel to novel in the Rebus series, so that you're kind of getting nuggets of parts of his life along the way. And I felt like that's what it's what this could have turned into for Eberron had it done better. But it's such a departure from like the fast food purple prose, right? That comes out of most gaming literature, where this was a departure from that, because it kind of leans very much into what pulp noir really feels like when you read it. Like this is what you want to get into. Or Ian Rankin. Like this is like, had I not gotten into Ian Rankin as an exploration, like I wanted to challenge myself to kind of get into other genres, and because I saw so many Ian Rankin books once at the thrift shop, and I figured I'd pick up 10 books of one author just to see. I took a gamble. Like I'm not really loving it, but they're addictive to some degree. It's hard to explain. And so I sort of enjoy these, but characters didn't really stick to, I'd enjoy the character. I'm just saying that it felt like Hellboy to me. That's probably not going to make sense if people don't understand any of these references. Like Hellboy novels for me, I love it because I love Hellboy, and I have like this connection to like the pacing of that kind of story, because it feels like what I would like, it's kind of akin to pulp noir superhero adventure. Like that's what Hellboy is to me. And this is that, but in Eberron, and it feels right. It feels like it fits in Eberron. If you know Eberron and you've read the setting books and you've run Eberron, there's a vibe to Eberron that it is this, but it doesn't fit, Does that make sense? Because you also expect the D&D-ish aspects to come out more when you're reading D&D fiction, by Wizards of the Coast and stuff like that. And so I can see why this didn't do so well in the market. There was supposed to be a 3rd book at one point. That 3rd book never got printed. Now, as I understand things, because I looked into it to see if maybe it got released online or something like that, I don't believe it did. On Goodreads, there's ratings for it, but I'm like, but the book doesn't exist. How are the ratings for this? Anyways, but it does sound like the line actually came to an end. Like Wizards of the Coast ended their novel line somewhere around to 2010 era, and so the third book got cut out of the way. I would have bought it and I would have read it and I probably would have enjoyed it. I enjoyed the character. I enjoyed the idea of what this could have been. I feel like something happens in the first book. I mean, it's called The Left Hand of Death. Something happens to his hand that sort of gets fixed by this book. And so there's a bit of continuity in that they reference it, but it doesn't really carry over, which tells me that this was really positioned to be more of a serial pulp noir experience that they were really going for, and they were a little bit shorter than the standard gaming books. I believe these didn't quite crack the 300 page mark. Let me just double check. Yeah, they're like 270 pages. Usually these gaming books are 320. This was a 270 page, and this one was almost a 400 pager. So I believe that these are supposed to be fast-paced fiction, and I don't know, the line ended and they just moved on. So that was my Eberron grind for the last 4 days. Like I did a bit of work there. Yep. And then somewhere in the middle of this, when I was taking a break, I ended up reading the first arc of The Mother of Loathing, which is a web serial. I could pull it up, but I mean, it's the best. It's the most viewed serial on Royal Road. If you want to go there and check it out, it is free to read. You can buy the books as well on Amazon. It's a lot of words, but I mean, it's #1 on Royal Roads. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't really landing on me. And then I got to chapter, I don't know what it was, 3 or 4 or 5. I started getting used to the cadence of the storytelling and the way that the prose kind of worked, and I got interested in the story. So like, this is an example again of where the prose is nothing like either of these as examples, right? Nothing like it. I'm not saying it's like because it's unique. I'm saying it's like there's different ways of writing, and I've been really enjoying going down, just exploring different. Like Ian Rankin is very different than an Abercrombie, very different than a Sanderson, very different than Dean Koontz, which I read a month and a half ago. I read 3 novels, and I'll get to it if this doesn't turn into an hour. But it's kind of opened up my horizons into the way you can write to kind of tell a story that's also a vibe. There's of course like a personal style that you develop along the way, but for me it's like I felt like I had a style, but then the more I kind of read these different styles, the more I go, there's that vibe I get when I read a certain type of the way that something's written, if that makes sense. And so I'm kind of just exploring what that might mean. By the middle part, I was like, okay, this is getting creative, is how I would put it. And then I kind of got hooked in, and then I kind of grinded it through and lost some sleep over it until I got to the end arc, which I think is chapter 26, I believe, if not 27. It's somewhere in that range. And a bit of the reveals happen. So like that act 3, oh crap moment really kind of turned things around for me. That goes maybe in that 3.5 to 4 star range for me. 4, right? And then I got to the last 5 chapters, and I was like, oh my god, this is actually getting kind of, I can kind of see why the story gets addictive at this point, because you just get nailed with just enough crumbs where you're like, okay, now you kind of have an understanding of what the whole time loop is. At least you don't know the answers to it, but you know how the pieces are on the table, you know, and you can kind of see how the main character is moving towards getting control of all the pieces they need in order to challenge this thing. But you know that there are 3 other volumes. This is only 1/4 of the story. But what happens at the end of the first volume, you're like, how is he going to get through the next 3 volumes? Because just enough goes wrong, and the implications that there's just enough awareness now that the I'll just say the antagonist in the series is very much aware of how to stop being stopped, you know. And then you're like, okay, but there's 3 more volumes, man, and there's like, he still has to like grow so much more in order to get all these pieces in play. But you understand that there's like, you can see kind of the gears shifting in the way that the time loop prose is working, how the author is maneuvering these pieces and giving you just enough progression for you to kind of see how it might be possible. But I kind of want to experience the journey of evolving with the protagonist, seeing how the protagonist takes advantages of what he can learn that mitigate his weaknesses in the fact that he doesn't have as much mana, he doesn't have a lot of mana. So he has to get very smart about the way that he cast magic so that he can preserve as much mana as possible to he utilize it in the most efficient min-maxy way possible. And so it's just a fun kind of experience that I never anticipated, but halfway through I definitely started enjoying it. So I highly recommend. Okay, and then I'm going backwards in time here. About a month ago, I ended up reading the Darksword Trilogy, and this, I took long to get through this. Considering I went through these 6 Eberron books in 3.5, 4 days. These took me about a month and a half, almost 2 months, to finally convince myself to get through this. I read the first book and I didn't really enjoy it. This would have been like a 2 out of 5 star read for me. I might have bumped it up to 2.5 at some point. The idea was cool. Like coming out of Dragonlance with Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman with the Chronicles, and then the Legends series, and then there's the Hero series, and there's all those other series, and there's a certain kind of vibe that I got out of reading Dragonlance, you know, especially like those early books from, and those were written in the mid 80s, creeping into the late 80s. This was written in the late 80s. I think the last one was 90. I don't remember. But the point is, like, these would have been written either at the same time as the Dragonlance stuff or just after it, or maybe they got ramped out. They rushed these to market. I'm not sure what it was. It wasn't, I didn't enjoy it. I was going to say it wasn't that good, but like some people might have loved this, you know, but to me, it failed in the sense of like, you get there's a main character, but for 90% of this book, that's maybe too much. 80%. Okay. Maybe 80% of this book, the character is not the story. The story is the character you think is a secondary character is in the story more than the main character. And I guess what I would say is like it feels more like speculative fantasy in a sense of like the elevator pitch idea is interesting, right? It's like this world of magic and what happens when you get born without magic. Well, you're called dead, right? And that, like I had just a problem with that word being used as like always being used to refer to him as dad. He was born dead. That's because you're dead. And it's like every time that was mentioned, it's like the authors have to remind you what it meant to the story. Like I got it. Like not only did I get it, I got it. It was confusing at the beginning because you intentionally made it confusing that the baby was born dead. You're like, is this a stillborn? And they're like, oh, and then you understand like, no, born without magic. And then they sort of like this other stuff happens that you remove these babies from society because of the way that the setting works. And you kind of get it. But every time it got mentioned, it had to there was prose wrapped around it or dialogue wrapped around it where it didn't feel natural for the characters to keep bringing up lines about being dead, you know, but like having to explain that in a way that you're like, they're not undead. Like, I'm not making sense of that either. I know what I'm trying to mean because it happens for the entire trilogy and it got exhausting because the idea was cool, but the word didn't work. You know, they could have like said dead soul. They could have said deadling. They could have maybe used a different word or I'm not sure. I mean, whatever. Maybe it's a personal thing. I'm just saying it didn't work. It didn't work. And then the story not revolving around the main character that seemed to be so important to the story that then this Dark Sword gets made and stuff like that near the end. And the climax is cool, but you're like, it's not really hero. It's not really hero. Like, I mean, what happened, and it happened because it happened, but I'm not really seeing what the arc is, you know? I wasn't really following an arc. Maybe that's what I have to say with that. Oh, and there's like some derailment that happens with the secondary character that goes into the Fey realm with the Fairy Queen, and there's a whole marriage thing, and it's like, but none of that mattered. Like, it literally, none of that mattered. None of it. Not for the entire trilogy. These characters don't come back up. That place doesn't come back up. The idea of it doesn't come back up. It's so crazy that was chapters in that first book and kind of a derailment. I'm getting a little bit worked up, so I'm just gonna slow down a little bit. The second book, sort of the same thing. I sort of got through it and I'm like, there was one really cool moment in it that maybe would have brought this up to a 4 if I didn't dislike most of the rest of the novel. There was a cool moment with like this prince character that has this one-on-one. I guess that's what the cover, I mean, I just looked at it now and for the first time I really acknowledged what this cover was showing, but like it's kind of a moment where this prince has a talk with the main character because the main character's kind of anti-hero-esque in the way that he thinks, but this prince kind of whoops him. That's the best way I can put it. Whoops him and then gives him a verbal like smackdown that makes him really think about the way he's acting. And you know, yeah, he had a crappy childhood and it's what got him to be that way, but if he really wanted to like lead people, he's gotta have to turn things around and stuff like that. It's a little bit of an arc, like the prince is who he is, but like everyone serves him, but like everyone likes the prince, and it's kind of the banter of like people like me because I treat people like people, you know. I'm simplifying it extremely, but that moment, like when I read it, I was like, that was impactful, you know, and it stayed impactful. So I really enjoy the way that dynamic worked to evolve the main character, but but by the second half, the love story happens extremely quick, like Romeo and Juliet quick. I feel like that's the best example I can give to the way that that sort of all plays out. And it sort of has the same vibe all the way through. Not really supposed to be together. There's, you know, because he's dead. I hate that word in this context. Anyways, and then eventually, like the way that it ends, it's the worst way that it could end. And he has to kind of, he gets banished, she gets banished with him. And then again, that doesn't mean anything to anybody unless you read the series. But it ends and you're like, I guess we're going to find out what the story is in the place that they go beyond. Maybe book 3, possibly. Well, not really, because the first 15% of this story is you're ramped up into some war that has to do with like it's effective. I'm going to spoil everything. That's the entire point of the series that makes it speculative. Anyways, beyond is a technology world. It's like our world that has evolved, and there's like machines of war, right? Like tanks, planes, and all that stuff. And so that you find out that magic world is kind of in a bubble, and then there's the world beyond, and it's the real world, you know. And they're kind of protected from that. And the point is he comes back because he's got this dark sword, and so it kind of gets through this breach. And he can walk back without it he's not blocked from coming back. I don't need to get into the granulars of the story. The point is he gets back into this world. And then the way that it all kind of comes together, I didn't really understand. I didn't feel it. I didn't understand why I needed to care about any of it. It was a cool idea, speculative, modern versus magic. The idea behind the magic world and this magic character that's kind of wrapped into all of that, but it doesn't really work for me. So I gave the entire series a 3 out of 5. Again, I had to be ambiguous near the third book because I kind of don't want to spoil it if people want to kind of jump into it and see for yourself how you feel. Like, especially if you come from the Dragonlance Chronicles and you jump into something like Darksword, do not expect the same experience you got with the Dragon Age Chronicles. I read the Chronicles, I would have been 30 years ago at this point. And then I read it again somewhere at the 23 years ago mark. It had a lasting impression, and there are many moments in the Dragonlance Chronicles that I still distinctly remember. I remember all the names. So you're in high school and you get the banter, like we were sharing books around, and so you're at the cafeteria table, you get to talk about these books that you're reading, the Caramon and the Raceland, like kind of dynamic, and the Tannis stuff, and the Lorantha Laza, and there's these moments that really like stand out, right? The Lord Soth stuff and the Gitiara, and it's like and I'm a Ravenloft fan, so clearly Lord Soth ends up one of my favorite characters because he ends up a Ravenloft Dark Lord, and so there was a whole world behind all of this that made me care about the world of Dragonlance, whereas I intended to feel that way when I went into the Darksword Trilogy. And so like when you read novels based on tabletop worlds by writers who are maybe like really good writers from a game design or game world development, world building development, like you feel the world building love that they have, because when they write these kinds of books, that's the kind of fast food purple prose I'm talking about. It's there, but it's there because they love world building. I love world building. That's why I love these. I mean, they might be kind of cheesy books, and they're not really like people kind of like these are throwaway books for people. They're not even going to give them a chance, you know. But that's why I love them, you know, because I tend to not get that kind of world building. And like, for example, Brandon Sanderson with the Mistborn series, that first book, you understood the world, but he didn't really force feed you anything about the world. The world was with the way the characters talked, the way that they engaged with the world. That's how you learned about the world. And that turned something around for me where I was like, oh man, it was just a different approach that I really wanted to explore. I did end up reading Dean Koontz about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago. This is kind of an update for June and July, I suppose. This one contained The Servants of Twilight, Darkfall, and Phantoms. This is the second of the Omnibus kind of collections that I've been picking up at the thrift shop for Dean Koontz. And what I have to say here is a little bit of an opposite. I went in here, even like each start of each of these stories, and that's true for the first volume that I read of 3 books, where I'm starting to read, I'm not really like digging in, and it's because I'm not used to this kind of writing. It's a new author. It's a genre that I don't really read, like the thriller or suspense kind of genre. You'd think, because I kind of enjoy horror, but I like that kind of more gothic horror-y kind of stuff, right? Supernatural horror stuff. I'm not really into like slasher fic. I'm not into mystery, suspense, thriller, stuff like that, right? But I have to say, when I would get to like the 25 to 50% mark is when I was like, I'd get into it. Like I really, even if I wasn't really like fully on board with maybe the pacing of stuff, or like, because I'm not used to it, you know, I'd get halfway and I'm like, I'm kind of interested. Like I kind of want to get to the end. I'm actually interested because the ideas are not really unique, but then they end up sort of unique. And the fact that they're simple enough for me to just understand what's going on. And it becomes like, it just becomes a smooth journey, you know, even though there might be some mystery involved. Like here's the best way I can explain it. Like I can envision an 80s movie when I'm reading Dean Koontz so horrors. Does that make sense? Like, and maybe it's because like when I was early teenager, I was watching horror movies that I shouldn't have been watching, but like there were a lot of Stephen King movies that were dropping back to back in like 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, and not all of them were good. Not all of them were good, right? Lawnmower Man. But it's like, but you'd watch them and there was a vibe behind them. Like Pet Sematary scared the crap out of me, right? But then there's just a vibe, and that's the vibe I get when I read these. The one with the story about the scientists and the weird Lovecraftian kind of Silent Hill city. Like there's, again, I'm reading it, not understanding what I'm reading. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to follow. You know, I get confused in the first 25%, right? Because I tried to read it, splits of 4. So that way I can kind of, I think about story beats while I go. So I'm kind of analyzing the story structure of something as I read it. So when I get to 25% mark, I'm going, that would technically be like an act 1. There's like kind of these beats that are supposed to happen, these seeds that are supposed to drop. Sometimes they do the mirror pattern that will show up in the act 3, and it gives me something to kind of hook into and then see what happens in that first half of act 2. And then, you know, there's the second half of act 2, and there's just enough pieces that happen in that first half of act 2 that then tell me, like, it makes me anticipate how there might be the rigmaroles and stuff like that. And it sort of does exist in this, but the way that the storytelling is done, I'm not used to it. And so I get derailed. And that one with the weird, am I spoiling something by saying like the insecty kind of the point, the Silent Hill city with the weird disappearances and the thing images that they end up discovering. And it's creepy. And it's intentionally ambiguous long enough for you to kind of go, you know, it's the monster you don't see, you know? And then when you see it, you're like, did I read that right? Because I feel like I read something different somewhere else. And then it would confuse me. And I'm like, but that's kind of what the characters are feeling. They're feeling kind of confused. And then I started, like, my feelings start to get injected into the characters I'm following, and I end up liking it, man. So I've really enjoyed Dean Koontz more than I would have anticipated, whereas I really expected to enjoy a Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman trilogy, and I hated it? Question mark. I mean, hated it, but you gave it a 3. It's like a 2.5 lifted up to a 3 because Goodreads doesn't have 0.5s, you know? Whereas this was like a 3.5 reduced down to a 3. Because I wish it were, I don't know, there was more fantasy and mixed with the noir. Anyways, that is what I have to say.